Walls have ears. In this video, we look at a report by the Syrian Justice and Accountability Center, the SJAC, that analyzes classified documents smuggled out of Syria.
The operation was confidential because it's sensitive information, and also very high risk because in lots of cases the government aircrafts came back and bombed these buildings just to prevent any extraction of documentation.
France 24 gained exclusive access to some of the documents. This one from 2012, issued by the Syrian armed forces, shows it wanted spies within the Muslim Brotherhood. Precisely 5,003 documents were analysed by the Washington, D.C.-based Syrian Justice and Accountability Center, the SJAC. The idea for the organisation emerged after war broke out in Syria. A need to collect and preserve documentation of human rights violations was discussed at a meeting in 2012 of the opposition group Friends of the Syrian People. The SJAC says it gathers documentation from all sides in the conflict. It's funded by the Open Society Foundations, Germany, the Netherlands, the US, Switzerland, and Finland. So how were the intelligence documents extracted from Syria? In 2013, the Syrian government abandoned buildings in Tabqa and Raqqa. Facilities were left open and unprotected. The SJAC says its team members entered and left with documents, and then took them to Turkey. In 2015, more classified documents were located, this time in an abandoned intelligence centre in Idlib. But soon, local opposition armed groups took the centre over. They let an SJAC team member inside, and some of the documents were copied onto a hard disk, and it was taken to Turkey. We wanted to know, did the SJAC pay money to get hold of these documents?
No armed group, no government officials were paid exclusively, clearly. This is a very important element of our research and methodology because we are in respect of the UN protocol against the bribery of officials.
How can you be sure the documents are not fakes?
We documented very well the extraction process, getting the documents out. We took pictures and videos as much as possible. Of course, any lawyer will basically challenge the authenticity of the documents in any international tribunal. And here it's up to the court to hire experts to look at the age of the paper, the ink, basically the matching of the same ink, the same handwriting. But we're not worried about that because we've documented very well and preserved very well our documents.
In early 2011, when protesters ousted the long-standing Tunisian and Egyptian presidents, tens of thousands of Syrians also took to the streets. They'd grown tired of more than 4 decades of rule by the Assad family.
If you live in a country like Syria with a massive and complex security apparatus, walls have ears, so stop talking, zip your mouth, do not comment, do not criticize the government, do not speak publicly. Syrians have lived for decades with the fear that the government or the government agencies will be listening to them.
How the Syrian government dealt with the 2011 uprising. Do the necessary. That meant more surveillance and more arrests, says the SJAC. The documents it analysed came from 7 state security agencies. The SJAC says the documents show how security agencies relied on informants. They wanted to know who was behind the protests and discourage Syrians from taking part. Soldiers informed on each other, doctors informed on their patients, family members informed on relatives. And anyone accused of having insulted the president, non-violent protesters, so-called enemy media, and armed terrorist groups were lumped together. The SJAC says the documents show they were all deemed inciting elements, including foreign journalists. This document from December 2011 shows a French-Lebanese journalist had her phones tapped. It states that a notification banning her from entering the country was issued by the intelligence division, and her 2 French phone numbers are currently under surveillance. The information gathered was used to draw up wanted lists, like this one. Members of the groups which were organising the protests, known as local coordination committees, were targeted for arrest by the security services. Identify coordination committees via investigations, reads this document, arrest all of their members in order to end the demonstrations in all governorates in the country. The Syrian government, though, says it only locks up criminals and terrorists.
Well, all due respect to the Syrian government, documents of the Syrian government itself and its security agencies tell an opposite story. The type of names appeared in the documents and people put under surveillance, a list of wanted people or detainees, does not really correspond with the charges of terrorism. We're talking about activists and peaceful rights, or some basic rights like peaceful protesting or rights to assembly or freedom of expression. And also the date of these documents goes back to 2011 and 12, even before the emerge of ISIS, Nusra, or other extremist groups.
How were the inciting elements treated? The order, "do the necessary," was found frequently in the documents. But what does "do the necessary" mean?
The term "do the necessary" was the mere order leaders of security agencies or leaders of branches were giving to their subordinate officers or to the lower level officers. Basically, here's what's happening. We collected information about protest. Go do the necessary. Actually, do the necessary means you can do whatever you want. It's an open card or an open invitation for officers to use whatever they want, and empower, including lethal power.
Thousands of videos like this one emerged online that could not be independently verified at the time. But they appeared to show the security forces doing the necessary to crack down on protesters. The Syrian President Bashar al-Assad said he and his government were not responsible for what he called individual mistakes made by some soldiers.
لكن أنا أريد أن أؤكد بأنه لا يوجد عطاء لأحد ولا يوجد أي أمر، أؤكد مرة أخرى على هذه النقطة، لا يوجد أي أمر في أي مستوى من مستويات الدولة بإطلاق النار على أي مواطن. لا يحق إطلاق النار بحسب القانون إلا دفاعا عن النفس، دفاعا عن مواطن، وعند الاشتباك مع شخص مسلح يحمل سلاح.
The SJC, though, says the documents it analysed show atrocities and rights abuses were ordered from those at the top of the regime during the 2011 uprising and once it had morphed into full-scale war.
So some of the documents clearly order attacks in locations or treatment with detainees or specific information about attacking cities or besieging cities or bombing a hospital. The nature of these orders and the way they are sent to branches and the way they were implemented shows clearly this was a state systematic practice. So it includes the knowledge of the highest level of the officials in the country, including the president. And it shows that these crimes were not individual mistakes or orders. It's more in line with the state practice. So the document shows clearly and could be used as evidence to indict the Syrian officials and the government.
Also, the SJC says it's identified 25 pages that could be used as direct evidence of persecution against the Kurdish community by the Syrian government. The Kurdish minority mostly live in Syria's north and northeastern regions near the borders with Turkey and Iraq. For decades, they've complained of discrimination, intense surveillance, unlawful detention, and oppression of their culture and language.
Kurds have been claiming they've been victims of discrimination, but the government in Damascus basically say that's all lies. They're not targeting anyone. It's just tales. Now the Kurds have the proof.
In a memorandum dated April 2010, the intelligence division set out recommendations concerning, quote, the Kurdish situation and how to address it. Direct the administrative and executive bodies in the province to work to dismantle Kurdish communities. The document goes on to recommend expanding irrigation channels near Kurdish houses and neighbourhoods, or surrounding these places with paved roads. The relevant government agencies should confiscate agricultural lands and create state-owned development farms, and employ Arab workers there and build housing for them and their families. So what will happen to the documents now? The SJC believes they could be used as evidence of human rights violations, crimes against humanity, and since the armed conflict began, possible violations of the laws of war. It says it has access to 500,000 more classified documents, just waiting to be analysed.